Hi, how's it going? Welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess. I hope you're doing well on this lovely December day. I know everybody says this at this time of the year, but I cannot believe it's December. I feel like it was just Halloween yesterday, so I don't know what happened to November. I don't know where it went. And speaking of November, these are all the books that I read in November. I'm very, very proud of myself this month. I read 7 books, and it was a total of 2,197 pages. Sorry, I was looking sideways at the legendary whiteboard that you may have seen in my most niche books video. So these are the 7 books that I read this month. Some of them were hits, some of them were mid, and some of them were just downright bad, and I wish I hadn't read them. If you are new here, how I normally do my monthly wrap-ups is that I film it in batches so that it's less overwhelming for me than talking about all 7 of these at once. I also have a really shoddy memory, so it just makes it easier to talk about it freshly after I finish it, or as freshly as I can. So I'm going to take you back to the past, where we're going to talk about the first book that I read in November. Okay, bye. The first book that I read this month was not a fantastic start to November, and it sure was a book that I read, and that is Mistress of Lies by K.M. Enright. This is my Illumicrate edition, so it's got these sprayed edges and really great artwork inside. I mean, the naked hardcover on its own is just drop dead gorgeous. Unfortunately, I don't really feel the same about the inside of the book. Before we get into that, let's just talk about the premise of this book. So this book takes place in a fantasy setting. It's not set in our real world, and it's a world where blood magic exists. So the kingdom that this book is set in is one of the only kingdoms where blood magic is acceptable and not illegal. The blood magic system and blood working is effectively just vampirism, because they need to ingest blood in order to use that as the energy source for their magic. And not only that, it's also very tied into the ruling class, so all of the nobility and the wealthy are blood mages. So this kingdom is led by the Eternal King, who is a blood worker, and all the nobility are blood mages. And anybody who is not a blood worker is called unblooded. The unblooded make up the working class and all of the lower classes within this kingdom, and so naturally there's a bit of a power dynamic in terms of the blood workers who rule the country, but also they demand that the unblooded contribute a blood tax for basically living in this kingdom, and the blood tax goes to the royal blood workers, and that's what they use to conduct their magic, basically. In addition to that, I think there's this royal sacrifice situation where an unblooded is sacrificed to the Eternal King and he drinks their blood, and that's what prolongs his life or something like that. I think it's every year. But so obviously with that kind of a setup, you can imagine there's going to be rebellion in this. There's going to be an undercurrent of resistance to the hierarchy of the blood workers and the nobility, and then the unblooded being downtrodden. So this is a dual POV narrative. So one of the POVs is from Shan, who is a blood worker, and she's a member of high society, but because of some scandal and some decisions that were made in her family line, I suppose, her family is kind of disgraced at the moment, and so she is trying to reclaim her family's power and reclaim their dignity and honor, I suppose. And so that's kind of her arc in this, is trying to seize power and manipulate and scheme, and she's very much a schemer. The other POV is a man named Samuel, who is just living among the unblooded. However, he has a dark secret, and that is he does have some degree of blood working capability, but not in the same way that other blood workers use their magic in this book, like Shan, for example. So I don't want to go too much into that because I don't remember how much of it is considered like spoiler territory. He and Shan end up getting kind of pulled into the court of the Eternal King by accident, I suppose. Shan not so much, because she is scheming to get close to the king and regain her power and her family's position in society, but also she has some other schemes going on. She kind of has a lot of different interests, and then Samuel gets kind of roped into it by accident because he stumbles upon the corpse of someone who was seemingly murdered by a blood worker, which apparently doesn't happen in this society. Blood workers never kill unblooded, I guess. Mochi? Mochi! What do you got? Good job! But there seems to be this serial killer on the loose, and it seems like it's a blood worker, so it kind of starts this inquisition or investigation into the court of the king, because the king suspects maybe it's one of his own blood workers who is committing these murders. So Samuel was there, he got roped into this investigation, and then Shan is aware of his power and has been kind of like tailing him for some time. So she ends up tracking him down because of his involvement in the murder, because he was a witness, and so she tracks him down and she starts working with him, trying to rope him into into her schemes because she has some theories about how he got his powers and who he is, and she wants to use those theories and his power to help her in her scheming. I don't know if any of that made any sense because I finished this book very early in November. I carried it over from October. It's a little hazy in my mind, and I also didn't really have a great experience with this, so I've kind of blocked it out a little bit. Hopefully that premise made any sense, but let's talk about my personal feelings on this now. Right off the bat, I have some issues with the world building and the magic system in this story. The world building is very, very loose. We get a little bit of information about the kingdom and about the continent, I suppose, that we're on, but we get very little outside of that in terms of the other kingdoms or other countries and how blood magic operates in those, because all we know is that it's illegal, and we don't really get to see how the Eternal King made it so that blood working was legal here. We just don't really get a lot of information about how this kind of came to be, where this one kingdom is like a safe haven for blood workers, and we didn't really get to look outside of this kingdom very much and see how the roles are kind of flipped with the unblooded and blood workers in other countries. It would have been nice to see that, especially in regard to how the unblooded are oppressed here. And then also on the magic system, how blood magic works and what it's capable of is never really defined. It seems like blood magic is capable of anything, even in the most convenient situations, and it doesn't really define the rules for this magic system. It seems like blood magic can manipulate anything within your body or on your body, and also you can use blood magic on other people, but there's never any kind of hard rules on what it can do and what you can do to yourself and to other people using blood magic, and it just seems like very convenient a lot of the time. I don't know, I just don't really have any instances in this where I feel like, wow, blood magic is really powerful, it's really useful, or wow, that was really crazy, I can't believe that the blood magic can do that. I just kind of felt like it was very mundane, and I wish that it had a little bit more elaboration on it, and I wish that the blood magic was used for much more impactful scenes and in much more impactful situations. I just feel like this didn't really deliver on the magic. And one thing about this that I did appreciate was that there was trans rep in this, and I appreciate the attempt to explain transitioning and like gender affirming care using the magic system. It was kind of interesting, and I wouldn't have really thought that that could work like that, but the magic system doesn't really have any concrete rules, so I guess you can use it for whatever you want. Yeah, so the magic system, the world building, and I also find that the characters, mainly in Sean and Samuel, were lacking quite a bit. Samuel's character, I think he was more rooted in reality, and I think that his internal struggle in regards to his own power and hiding his power, but also feeling a lot of shame about it, and also his arc around being pulled unwillingly into high society and his struggle around perceiving all of this wealth and all this excess around him, comparing it to his life as an unblooded, and how the resentment that builds when you're exposed to that much wealth can make you jaded, can make you bitter, and can make you angry and resentful at the people who are withholding all of that wealth from everyone who needs it. I think that his character was very realistic in that regard, and I find his personal arcs very interesting. I guess the problem that I had was with Sean. Hi. Mochi joined us. But yeah, Sean seems like she is written as if she's this puppeteer, spy master, working in the shadows, pulling strings and doing all this stuff. But I think the way that she is actually depicted and the way that she acts and the decisions she makes don't really reinforce that. Oh, okay, see ya. A lot of her decisions just don't really make sense, especially with the information that she has and that we know she has because she has a network of spies. The spy master situation was just a little silly because she's this member of high society and she has this very well-known persona because she's involved in the court and involved in the government. But then as a spy master, she just puts on like a leather outfit and goes to different, businesses and bars and things where the unblooded frequent. But blood workers also see her and they somehow don't recognize her, even though she's just wearing like a leather outfit and maybe different hair and makeup. But somehow that never really becomes a problem until one moment where it conveniently does become a problem and someone does recognize her. But it makes you wonder why no one recognized her before this and found out her identity as the spy master. I just find that her character didn't make a lot of sense in terms of the way that she is depicted and the way that she actually acts in comparison to that. And overall, I just found her character to be kind of lacking, and I find that she didn't really come to any complete arc in this. And I know it does have a sequel, so maybe her arc will kind of complete in that book, but I have no intention of reading that one. So I was disappointed by her and not really interested in her arc. I was much more interested in Samuel and Isaac as characters. I also had some issues with the writing. The writing itself, in terms of the descriptive language and the prose, I suppose was nice, but I find there were a lot of inconsistencies in terms of how scenes were set up. There were multiple times where I was imagining how the scene was looking in my head as characters were discussing things and moving about the room. Of course, I wait to start filming until the afternoon, and they're weed whacking now. You know, one character would be like seated somewhere in the room, and then the next line, they're somehow standing and they're behind the other person. I was like, where did that come from? She was just sitting on these barrels or something. And there were a lot of moments like that where something about the actions taking place within the scene totally took me out of the moment, because we expect the character to be here doing this thing, and then the next thing you know, they're somewhere else doing a different thing. Anyway, those kinds of inconsistencies, I feel like, just kind of pull you out of the story and pull you out of the immersion, and I find that that was happening a lot in this. The pacing was also an issue in this. I think that the beginning of it was paced very, very slowly. Things were taking a long, long time to unfold, to the point where it was dragging a lot in the middle. And then the last little bit gets so action-packed, it just felt very sudden, like, oh, the book's about to end, like, we need to wrap this up. And I think that the way that that was handled and the reveals that we got, it just didn't pay off. So unfortunately, this really didn't work for me, and I gave it 1.5 stars. I just think between the world building, the magic system, the characters, the plot, the delivery and execution of all of this, I just find a lot of it was lacking. I think there were really good ideas in here, but unfortunately it just didn't deliver on that for me. So yeah, that was Mistress of Lies. Kind of a bummer way to start November.
1 hour later.
They stopped weed whacking, let's fucking go! Alright, the next book that I read this month is a drastic change of pace from the first book that I read this month in basically every single way, and that is Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. This book, this was so good, especially after finishing Mistress of Lies. I really needed something impactful, emotional, everything. This delivered on all of that. This one is the first in a duology. The other one is, let me grab it. The other one is Redemptor. I got these Illumicrate editions secondhand on Pango. I actually started this one on a digital copy from my library, and then I said, no, this book is going to be insanely good. I need a physical copy. And I got the set, so I'm very happy about that. So this kicks off a duology. It is a fantasy duology. I believe it's YA, but it doesn't really read YA. The characters are very young, but it doesn't feel like a YA book or YA writing, if that makes any sense. Not that YA writing is bad, but I just feel like it doesn't have that tone that a lot of young books do. This book is set in a fantasy country or continent called Aritsar. I think I'm saying that right. But it is made up of all of these smaller countries within it, with the exception of Songland, which is its own entity. But it starts off in Swana, following our main character, Tarisai. So in this country or continent of Aritsar, there are 12 provinces, or I guess smaller countries within it, which make up the Empire, and the Empire's seat of power is in Alawan. There is a very elaborate world-building system within this of the Empire, the 12 countries that make up the Empire, and each of these countries has a very specific and very intricate world-building of its own, and I love that each country has its own identity that feels very established and very well rooted in this world. So how it works with the Empire in this book, I should probably elaborate. There is the Emperor at the center, and then there are 11 members of his council, which are each from one of the 11 countries. The emperors in this world are chosen by kind of divine right. They are gifted with the Ray, and they are called the Raybearer. And that Ray gives them the ability to link people to them in their council. And for each person that they anoint with their Ray, they gain an immunity to one of the 13 kinds of death. There's a lot of world building that goes into this in terms of the myths and the lore within this world are very rich. Definitely just read this if you want the lore, because it is so rich. But anyway, so the Emperor has the Ray, and he will anoint 11 members to be his council, which gives him immunity to all of the ways of dying minus old age. So the only way that an emperor can die is from old age. So the current emperor has a young son, and the way that the emperor and the next council is chosen is that children are sent from all of the different countries. They are sent to the children's palace, and they're supposed to get to know and bond with the heir, and then any that the heir has deemed kind of worthy of being in his council, he will then anoint with his Ray. And then the goal is for him to assemble his full council. And so our main character, Tarisai, has been raised her whole life in preparation for this event, for her to go to the children's palace and hopefully earn her spot on the new emperor's council. So that's kind of the setup for her and her character. There's a lot more that goes into this. Sorry, it's FedEx. I'm sure he'll be gone soon. So Tarisai goes to the children's palace, and we get to see her bond with with Akundayo, the heir, and also some of the other children from different countries. And seeing her build friendships and open up to people and start to build meaningful relationships with these other children is really wholesome. And I really, really love the relationship building in this book. All of the characters are so fleshed out and they have such unique personalities. And I really, really loved the side characters in this, as well as Tarisai. I thought she was wonderful. She's a wonderful protagonist. I really was rooting for her the entire time. And I loved the side characters like Dayo, Sanji, Kira. They are so wonderful. So this is, of course, just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this. There's so much more. The world building is so rich. The plot is so multifaceted, and I didn't know at any point where this was going to end up going. I was fully engrossed in it and immersed from the moment I started this book. I just highly recommend this. I didn't give it a 5. I gave it a 4.5, but I kind of want to give it a 5. You know, I'm bumping that up. This is a 5-star. So I really, really loved this. And if you want a non-Western setting in your fantasy and you want to see meaningful relationships, platonic relationships, as well as romantic relationships, mentorship, and parenthood, and all these different things depicted so realistically, and you want really elaborate world building, read this. It's so good. So that is Raybearer. It's all downhill from here, bitch. So let's move on to the next book that I read this month, which is Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. This is a contemporary mystery, I suppose. I think it's categorized as a thriller. It's not. Whatever it's listed as, it's not. It's basically just a family drama with some light mystery added to it. But anyway, this book takes place on a very remote, isolated island, a stormy island with these cliff faces that are very drastic and jutting, and there's rocks, and it's like, just picture like a completely isolated island with like a single lighthouse, pieces breaking off the island. You're pretty much there. Definitely capturing the very stormy, turbulent? Does that even apply to this? I guess. It just captures that atmosphere very, very well. I will say what this does have is atmosphere down boots. So this book follows a family that is living on this island. It's a father and his 3 children, and they are basically the caretakers of this island. There's a seed vault on the island which houses millions of varieties of seeds, and Dominic is there as the keeper of this island and the protector of the vault, basically. And I think he's not supposed to have his kids there, but he has his kids there. Their mother passed away, and so it's just him as a single dad living on this island with his 3 children. And one day a woman washes ashore, seemingly out of nowhere. They don't know where she came from. You don't know why she's there. Did she intend to be there? What does she want? So it's just kind of like a light mystery. I would not say that the mystery is the dominant element of this. Like I said, this basically boils down to family drama on an island. And I think that the major themes of this are parenthood, especially in regard to, you know, Dom's relationship with his children, Rowan's relationship to the children, each of the children's personal development and where they're at in their life stages and how they're coping with the loss of their mother, the appearance of this new strange woman, how they're coping with their father being very emotionally distant and closed off. So if that's what you want out of this, I think it would be definitely up your alley. I just went into this expecting a little bit more of the mystery thriller elements to be there, a little bit more of something surreal. So if you want like a very realistic, grounded in reality, family drama on a stormy lighthouse island, this might be for you. It just personally wasn't giving what I walked into it expecting, but I still didn't think it was bad by any means. It just didn't really work for me. So I gave it a 3-star, and that is Wild Dark Shore. The next book that I read this month is a short story collection, and that is One Bad Night and Other Stories. This is an Aardvark exclusive. If you know Aardvark Book Box, this is an exclusive short story collection from them, and it has stories by Kay Chronister, Dell Sandine, Kylie Lee Baker, Rachel Harrison, CJ Lead, Jennifer Thorne, S.A. Barnes, and Stephen Graham Jones. This collection was definitely an experience, largely not a great one. I will say right now, I gave the collection overall a 2.5 star. Just throwing that out there. I will talk about each of my ratings for the short stories. There was one story in this that blew the other ones out of the water, and then the rest of them were like either completely mid or just bad, in my opinion. I think part of it is my own taste in horror wasn't really meshing with a lot of these, because I prefer my horror to have supernatural elements to it, a little bit of surrealism, actually a lot of surrealism. I like books that are really trippy, that make you kind of questioning what's real, what's not. I also like my horror to be set in the past. I don't really like it set in the present too much, with the exception of a few that I've read that are more modern horror. I like them to be set in a historical setting, and I like when my fantasy and sci-fi kind of blends with the horror. So unfortunately, a lot of these are more set in like the present day, and just the setting of a lot of them and the kind of premise didn't really work for me on a lot of them. Let's talk about the ratings for each of them. I'm just going to read you the inside flap because it talks about each short story. It gives like a one-sentence synopsis for each one. So I'm going to go through each one, and then I'm going to tell you my ratings for each one. In Two Observers of the Slaughter Rites on Gannett Island, an anthropologist and his wife travel to the remote Gannett Island to observe a mysterious yearly ritual. In My Lithopedia, a woman learns she had an unborn twin sister extracted as a stone baby during her late mother's autopsy and decides to keep it. In Lady Jawbone, Lilu is trapped working inside a nightmarish phosphorus match factory when a strange new arrival offers her a way out. In A Necromancer's Guide to Reconnecting with an Ex, the ghost of Roxanne's rock and roll ex asks her to resurrect him, forcing her to confront what it means to truly let go. I don't think they realized when they wrote that how difficult that sentence is to say. Anyway, in Red Tide, a woman running from her past finds work at a small-town aquarium where she encounters the specter fish, a carnivorous mer creature of local lore. In 47 Pine View Way, an anxious mother drops off her son at his first sleepover, but the next morning, the house where she left him has disappeared. In A Meditation on the Existence of Certain Cutlery, There Is No Spoon, Commander Janna Field is on a covert mission to the lunar South Pole. Or is she? In One Bad Night, Steck, an aging, lonely man, becomes fixated on a sinister green parrot after it seems to predict the death of his beloved dog. What did I give each of them? Hang on a second, I gotta look. I cannot read that from here. Who am I kidding? So for Two Observers of the Slaughter Rites on Gannett Island, I gave it a 3-star. My Lithopedia, I gave 1.5 stars. Lady Jawbone, 5 stars. That's the best one in here in my opinion. Necromancer's Guide to Reconnecting with an Ex, 1 star. Red Tide, I gave 3 stars. 47 Pine View Way, I gave 3.5 stars. Meditation on the Existence of Certain Cutlery, 2 stars. One Bad Night, 2.5 stars. So basically, the average was very, very low on this collection because the only one I really, really loved was Lady Jawbone by Kylie Lee Baker. This was my first short story collection, so I kind of got to experience for the first time the duality of a short story collection in the sense that you can go from a 5-star read to a 1-star read. I definitely struggled a lot on some of these stories with my interest level. I was just not feeling a lot of them, or some of them started off strong but then completely dropped the ball. But Lady Jawbone was for sure the strongest one for me in this, but so that was One Bad Night. The next book that I read this month is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This one is a classic taking place in rural Georgia, and it follows Celie starting in her adolescence through her life. And this book definitely starts off on a very heavy note. Right off the bat, content warnings for SA, childhood SA, domestic abuse, emotional and verbal abuse, child death, racism, and I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but yeah, this has a lot of content warnings, just be advised if you go into it. This story is told in letter format as Celie is writing letters to God and later on to her sister, and these letters to God basically act as her diary because she is kind of using it as an outlet to express and talk about the things going on in her life, and we follow these letters to God, these diary entries throughout her life, and it depicts all of the things that she's going through with her childhood abuse from her stepfather, being kind of sold off in marriage to a man that she doesn't really know, her marriage with him, multiple pregnancies that end in either the child being sold off or child death, and her separation from her sister Nettie as well as a consequence of her marriage to this man. And so it's a very, very heavy story. It gets into a lot of dark themes. It also explores themes of spirituality and religion as Celie is struggling with her belief in God because of all of the horrible things that she's been through and all of the things that have happened to people that she loves. There's also the theme of queerness in this because Celie doesn't really express attraction to men. She expresses attraction to women, specifically this one woman, Shug Avery, and she kind of goes through struggles throughout her life with her queerness as well, and struggling with her marriage to a man, not feeling romantic or sexual feelings towards men, and kind of struggling with her sexual and romantic relationships in general because of all the abuse she suffered. And it explores a lot of really deep themes and very emotional themes. And while I do have a lot of problems with this book in terms of the characters, pretty much all of them, minus Celie and Nettie, being really, really unlikable and straight up rotten characters, especially all of the men in this book, don't even get me started. on all the men in this book. But even Shug Avery and some of the other characters that you start off liking kind of take a bad turn, and so I just feel like most of my issues with this stemmed from the characters themselves, minus Celie, but also some of the resolution of this story. This is a feminist work, and it is a very groundbreaking work for its time. In a lot of ways, this is an extremely meaningful cultural work, especially for depicting the struggles of African American women in this time period and the things that they were going through. So I think that it's very, very meaningful and important in those ways. But at the same time, reading this with a lens of modern feminism and the current state of women's rights and civil rights and things like that, it definitely isn't as groundbreaking anymore, especially because of the way that a lot of the abuse and the suffering is kind of dismissed or accepted just because that's kind of how it was at that time. So obviously with a modern lens, I don't think this is going to be as revolutionary or as feminist or as liberating as it was at the time, but I do think that it's still a really meaningful work, and I'm so glad that I finally read it. And I generally don't read classics because I struggle a lot with the writing and how approachable they are, especially, you know, with like ADHD and kind of like struggling to read certain things over and over and over to kind of process the meaning. I do struggle a bit with a lot of classics that were written a long, long time ago because of the writing style, the grammar that's used, the way that the kind of sentence structure is even different. But this was very, very approachable. The weed whackers are back. But yeah, I gave this one 3.5 stars, and that is The Color Purple. The last book for now, because it is still November and I still have a couple books going that I hope to finish before the end of the month. But the last book that I read this month so far is Rooster Fighter, Volume 1, which is a manga, and I cannot tell you why I have this, why I read this. I was at Barnes & Noble the other day with my fiance, and we were looking at the manga section, and I saw this, and I started flipping through it, and I could not stop laughing. I thought it was hysterical. So I just was like, fuck it, I'm gonna get it and just have a silly, goofy time. And that's exactly what I had, is a silly, goofy time. So this book follows a rooster who fights demons and is on a vengeance quest to avenge his sister who has died. So basically, this is like the Punisher, if the Punisher was a rooster and instead of avenging his wife and kids, it's his sister, is the best way I can put it. But also throw some kaiju elements in there because there are these like giant demons with human faces that the rooster is fighting. But yeah, so, and then he has just some catchphrases that he says that are so funny. Like, just appreciate my comb is burning with rage. I don't know, man. This is just a really goofy time. It's not like groundbreaking or anything. I don't think I'm going to continue the series. I'm just going to treat it as like a one and done silly time. But yeah, that's Rooster Fighter Volume 1. I gave it 3.5 stars just because it's very silly. It's just a fun time if you want like an action movie with a rooster as the main character. And yeah, so that's Rooster Fighter. Alright, that's it for now. So I will see you in the next clip. Bye. The last book that I read this month is Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova. So this book is an interesting one. It's kind of hard to talk about because I don't really know how to classify it. It doesn't really feel like a horror, but it does at the same time have some horror elements to it. And it's a mystery in some ways, it's a family drama in other ways. But let me just take you through the premise of this. So this book follows a husband and wife who have just lost their son. Literally the first chapter of the book is their son passing away. And he is very young. He had a lung disorder. I believe he only had one lung. And so the book opens up basically with Magos and Joseph, her husband, embracing their son as he's dying. And it's very hard-hitting way to start a book, and it's definitely devastating in the way that it's described. So it's obviously got a lot of really heavy, kind of hard-hitting themes. So go into this with a little bit of caution. But right after Santiago passes away, Magos has the kind of urge to take a piece of him for herself to keep. And so she's thinking to herself, what's the most Santiago part of him that I can have? So following that morbid thought process, she decides to take a piece of Santiago's lung. So she literally cuts him open, takes out a piece of his lung, and puts it in a jar. And what follows that is a period of time where Magos and Joseph are not really speaking. They're kind of just coexisting in the same space, both going through their grieving process in a very different way, and how it kind of fragments and then eventually fully shatters their relationship. So following that period of shattering where Magos decides to leave Joseph, she ends up moving in with her mother, and she takes the lung with her. While she's living with her mother, someone close to her tells her about a folktale. I don't really remember the specifics about it, but it involves someone feeding an organ and having the organ grow into a person, basically. Magos very much takes that tale to heart and decides, following the tale, but also her maternal instinct, I suppose, she decides to feed this lung. It does start to grow, but not really into a person. And so the story kind of follows the events of all of this, but it's very strange because it's split into 4 POVs POVs, and I think that by far the first and the fourth were the best POVs, but the two middle ones were lacking quite a bit and very much took the emphasis away from this kind of really touching, beautiful story of grief and mourning. It kind of shifted the focus away from this grieving mother who displaces or otherwise kind of avoids her grief by instead nurturing this lung and forming an unhealthy attachment to the lung. I think that the story would have been a lot stronger if it had just stayed about that, and if it had just stayed with its first kind of arc, I suppose. I just really didn't enjoy the second and the third POV. I think that they all kind of contributed something to the story, and we did still get to see the continuous timeline of events through those POVs, but I didn't think that they really paid off. And the fourth POV, while I was very intrigued to see the POV from this character, I did not like some of the themes that were being handled in this. Some kind of strange sexual things that were going on that I don't think really fit in this story. And I'm all for generally like the overlap of sex and eroticism with horror. I think that those have a ton of overlap in them. I just kind of found it a little weird given all of the themes of maternal and paternal bonds and parenthood and the kind of debate of whether or not this character had full agency because of everything that we know. Matcha was on my desk, but also I had to adjust the exposure because it's getting dark. So it may be obvious from my tone, but I didn't love this. I did settle on a 3-star, and I'm kind of torn on dropping it a little bit to a 2.5 star. But I don't know, because there were some things that I really thought were so unique about this. I think that there were a lot of themes that were very strong, but I think that a lot of the character dynamics in this just felt like they didn't really make sense, or the build wasn't really there. If this story had just stayed rooted in a grief story and had just followed the POV of Magos and maybe Joseph, maybe I will drop it down to a 2.5. So that's Monstrilio, and that's the last book I read this month. This was a kind of rough reading month for me. It's definitely probably my lowest month on average in terms of ratings. I did read a lot though, so I'm very proud of how much I read, but it was a little bit rough just getting through some of these books. So I'm hoping that December will be a stronger reading month for me. We'll see. Thank you so much for watching, and I appreciate you being here. If you want to drop a comment below, tell me what was your favorite book that you read in November, or if you're not feeling super chatty, drop a sun emoji for Raybearer, because that was the best book of the month by far. Thank you for being here, and by the way, I have a Discord server. It's a very small server, but if you want to have little bookish chats or about anything really, it's kind of a general server. Maybe look into the server. It's in the description of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Can loud trucks stop driving by? Someone's gonna get executed anyway.